You're being lied to on a massive scale. There are so many things that you're being lied to about. You wouldn't believe it if I just told you right away and I didn't break it down before I got to the real truths. Now, you and I, we live in a time like any other where we are a part of a giant civilization and giant unified cultures where everybody is in one big group and everyone has to play by one big set of rules in order to survive, get along, and make things continue working. So, in order for that to happen, we all have to believe the same things. We all have to kind of do the same things. And in order for that to actually happen, you have to believe things that aren't necessarily true. Now, it all starts from a very young age, and it is indoctrination, it is education, it is really the people that are in charge trying to keep everyone all in line. Now, you might already know that, you might already have an idea of that, but do you know how deep that goes? Let's take, for example, a very trivial thing. When you go to the grocery store, how many types of things are there to eat, right? You go in, let's say the produce section, anywhere in the West. You walk in, what do they have? Bananas, oranges, apples, pears, lettuce, and maybe a couple of other things, right? That's maybe about a dozen to maybe 2 dozen types of fruits that you can actually buy in a produce section at a store. But have you ever stopped and thought about how many fruits and vegetables are there in the world that you could eat? The answer is there's tens of thousands. There's so many. You've never even heard of even 1% of them. But yet, why is it that we eat just those few, right? Now, I could be very conspiratorial. I could say, because those are the ones that aren't even that good for you, and that they just want you to eat because they don't want you to actually be truly healthy. Or I could make it a little more, calm. And I could say, well, it's because actually it's just too hard to grow all the other fruits and vegetables that you could potentially eat. They're not very conducive to actually being able to farm and then mass distribute. They're not all that, you know, easy to sell, or they take too long to grow, things like that. But the bigger question is, right, fine, maybe that's a legitimate reason. Why have you never heard of those other things? And or why have you never thought to try and grow them for yourself, right? Well, that kind of is like the next layer down, the next thing to look into. Maybe because one, you've never been educated on those. You've never actually been told about those things, right? That stuff you haven't been told about, there was no need to tell you because it wouldn't have been conducive to the system that we are in. Nobody said, maybe it's true there are things that are better for them, potentially, fruits and vegetables that would help them, but there's no need to because we need them to be within the system that we have running now that helps us towards our survival. And when I say our survival, that's not necessarily the collective survival, but the power structures survival, correct? Now, there are things like in my region, for example, I could grow fruit trees that are self propagating and that they don't actually need any pruning and or any type of pesticides, which if you haven't ever looked into pesticides, very bad for you. Glyphosate, roundups, they tear up your inside of your gut. They give you irritable bowel syndrome and gut inflammation, all this other stuff, right? But that's another topic. I could grow things like what are called pawpaws. which are a fruit tree that grow around here in Tennessee that are wild, and they produce fruit in dozens of bushels, and I didn't have to do anything to grow them. I mean, my brother has some on his property right now. They're awesome. There's tons of others. You could do elderberry around here. Fantastic for your health. So a lot of people, they think that it increases your lifespan, etc. I could go on with this list, but it's just an illustration to something. And that something is that I'm trying to point out here is that when you are taught in life, it's not necessarily to your own benefit. It is to the benefit of whatever systems are in place so that they can all be maintained. Now, other things you could point out that are lies to you is, what is it that you are here to do in life? What are you supposed to be? Who are we as humans, right? Now, if you want to touch on, you have, let's say you have a government education system, right? There's really no answers there. That's almost something that is ignored or pushed aside. More or less, the answer is you're here to be a good American or a Canadian or fill in the blank, right? And you're to be a good citizen. That is what you're here for. So the things that they don't want to touch on, one, from more of the government's perspective, they say there's supposed to be a separation of, church and state, right? Which there's some merit to that. There may be some good examples. You go back to Europe, back during both the Dark Ages and then, the Renaissance, etc. The church and government were very intertwined, and the Pope had a lot of say in who it was that was going to be king, and the king had a lot of say who was going to be Pope. Back and forth. It kind of depended on the century, but it didn't allow for a lot of religious freedom until more into the Renaissance. Now, that being said, that separation, right? If you want to go look into anything, then you have to go to, um, let's say, church or whatever. And the churches nowadays, right? You walk in, there's a couple of denominations in the West. You could be Catholic, you could be Protestant, and then all the sub, you could be a Lutheran, a Baptist, et cetera, et cetera. It's just different flavors of the same concepts, right? And with that being said, you would think, all right, so maybe someone would in that area be here to help me to my benefit, right, with religion or, higher meaning. What should I do in life? Should I have a family? Should I go out and should I go and try and accomplish great things, be an inspirational figure, kind of like, either like a Nelson Mandela or maybe the other route where it's like I'm an Andrew Carnegie who, shapes the world and is highly successful. Who am I supposed to be? Most of what they're going to really push you into the narrative being is a taxpayer. That's really what the system is incentivized to make you into being, is someone who works and maintains the essential systems or the positions that make gradual progress, all for the purpose of collecting taxes from you so that you can propagate who's in charge, right? Now, those religious institutions, right? You think they're not a part of that. That's not what they're here to do. Well, here's something that a lot of people don't know to start with. Um, each denomination of, let's say, Christianity, and this goes for other religions too, they actually have a complete system of thought that is not necessarily a part of the books that they read or the religions that they read. They follow interpretations of key theologians who set the interpretations of those books. And what's even crazier is many churches are franchised. You could say the Catholic Church is maybe one of the first franchise churches, but now the mega churches and all these other things, what they're doing is they are giving out sermons from top institutions nowadays. most pastors do not write their own sermons anymore. They actually get forwarded in emails sermons that they are to give to their congregation every Sunday. It's all a narrative driven message that's curated at the top. Pretty wild. You would think that would be one of the untouched areas that we would have in our culture is, religious expression, etc., that separation of church and state. But it's at this point the most facade for being separated. It's not at all. And most churches do not touch on deeper topics. They do not go into the weeds of theology or what these books talk about. And it's quite sad. Now, they could tell you something about how you live on for eternity, how your soul goes on forever, no matter what, right? Now, you could argue whether it lives on forever in a heaven or a hell or something like that, or maybe one of those things don't even exist. But that's not their interest. Their interest is to keep you focused more on the here and now and your actions and how you perform in this world. Not for the purpose of what will happen to your soul later on, but how you will fit in to the systems they have now. Okay. So I went from the produce section at Walmart over to the church. A big jump, but it's both to illustrate you are being given limited options, limited choices, all to give you the illusion of choice, right? If I say you want to go on vacation and you have the whole world to explore, but I was your travel agent and I just give you two or three choices, um, and I say that are available, are you really choosing to travel the whole world or something like that? Or is the travel agency kind of, telling you where you can go? Are you getting the idea that I'm getting here? So, with all that being said, um, there are so many books, there are so many other people who have already explored tons of things in life that they're just not allowed to be talked about. Or what's even more interesting is the people at the top know that the masses, most people, if something is not spoon fed to them, will not go and look into for themselves. They could literally write a scientific white paper on how to harm the masses or how to screw them over, but they just put it in very complex wording in jargon that the general populace doesn't understand, and they know no one will read it. Have you ever read a white paper put out by a government think tank or by some type of scientific journal? You probably haven't. Maybe you have. I've read a couple. They're pretty boring unless you're really a nerd and fixated on one specific topic. And you can't just read it and get the straight answer. You have to comb through all this data to try and figure out what it is that they're actually meaning. And scientists don't like to give bold statements on what the implications of some type of finding is. They keep it very politically correct because they know that if they get too much attention or they make it too sensationalized, they'll get a lot of political backfire because it could go too against the narrative. These scientists, they know a lot of things that they just keep to themselves in their groups by putting it in kind of like, when Thanksgiving happens in your family, or you get together for a holiday and you have the adult table and the kid table, and the parents want to talk about something that the kids shouldn't hear. A lot of times they'll just spell it out like, we're going to get a DOG for Christmas this year. And the kids, they don't catch on, right? Maybe. We're talking about very little kids. I mean, most kids would probably get that. You get the idea. So, that being said, what's the really cool part here? You could actually have a lot more benefits in life. You could actually have a lot more things that you want, and you could live the life that you want a lot more if you simply took the time to understand how reality works, how everything operates, and then you make the decisions for yourself on how to live and what you put your time and energy into. There's so many scams out there people fall for. Take college, for example. Once upon a time, a fantastic institution, the very top. And here's the thing, originally, college was designed that the masses could not go to it. It was intentional. College was not meant for everybody when it was originally instituted. It was meant for people who had an aptitude for intelligence. It was to sharpen the people who were already sharp and to put them into the places where they could actually move us all forward. Nowadays, college has turned into, you know, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th grade, not this giant institution that's here to help people. Half the time you go into freshman year of college, you have to retake your senior year of college. You have to redo algebra and some history level in biology. It's a repeat. That should, back in the day, you were tested going into college to see how smart you actually were and that you already had a deep well of information that you understood. You were kind of a prodigy type. That was the only way you got into college unless your family was really rich. You'd have to have letters of recommendations from other people who already went to that college, etc. Nowadays, it's there as a debt entrapment. It's there to trap you into the debt before you go into the workforce so that you will then have to stick to whatever career it is that you picked in that education and then force you into that tax system, right? Now, this is much more this is like from my videos that I'm doing. This is very political what I'm talking about here. I'm still trying to keep it very light, but it's here more to point you towards a bigger thing, and that is the best education is self-education or going directly to the people you respect the most and or the people that you know are well studied in a specific thing. And it's not easy because you have to have self-discipline and you actually have to have an interest in these other things. Now, I've done this for almost decades, almost 2 decades. I've been trying to self-educate. And actually, this is something I haven't talked about much. When I was young, or I should say just when I started being educated, I was homeschooled. I was not in a public school system my entire life. I was taught by my mother and by a large amount of other homeschool teachers. And we did not stick to typical curriculums. We went outside of the system, and I learned a lot because of it. You wouldn't believe the things that we got to learn. And it was a huge benefit to me. It taught me how to think for myself. Now, I have an interest to continue learning for life and to continue doing better. So, one of the things I want to do with this channel is I want to be a truth seeker, a truth sharer, someone who shares truth. And really, the bigger idea is to map out reality, to map out this existence around us. Now, this is something that I want to do as kind of an open source project where it's a dialogue between people. It's not just something that I just read a bunch of books, regurgitate to you my perspective, and tell you what to think, because that's putting you right back in a system like we talked about before. Now, I'm happy to share and to actually take leadership positions where necessary. But the point is to get you up to speed fast, because you could be making way more money in life. You could be way more independent in life. You could have way better social life. You could have tons of friends, and you could have an amazing lifestyle where you get to go vacation, all these other things, and not be in a state of anxiety and fear. Now, later today, It's Sunday. I'm going to do a live stream, probably 5 o'clock Central Time. I'm in Tennessee, so Central Time is where I'm at. And we're going to start doing a reality mapping. You're welcome to join, and we can go over some things. And we're going to start off, we're going to do a very broad little discussion together where we're going to talk about what is this reality we're even in and what should we even be putting our focus on. Now, that being said, I'm going to get off of here for now, and I hope to see some of you there later today. Let's set the topic on what is it that we even should be trying to figure out. And I'm going to set the topic as the number one thing that we can focus on in reality in this lifetime is truth. Because if you set your aim to the highest point that you can or on the center of the bullseye, you're much more likely to get accurate with what you should be doing. So thanks. Like, comment, subscribe, or share this video if you want. And I hope to see you guys later today. Hey, have a good one. Bye.